I knew that was going to happen. Let me rewire myself. I've not used one of these before, which kind of makes it fitting, because I've not ever preached this text this way before. I'm not sure you'd call this necessarily preaching, but I appreciate the assignment by my good friend Wade Webster. And he described how far we go back together and some of the context we've been in, and it's good to have him in the area. And I know you are glad here at South Haven to have he and his good wife working with you and their children. And I know they're glad to be associated with you. We are appreciative of this congregation and the good you have done over so many years, and not only this lectureship, but the other things that you do for the cause of Christ. It is important that each of us understand that this lectureship this week has been dedicated to one section of Scripture, to one story. And I appreciate the way disciplining us as speakers and saying, don't want you retelling the story over and over and over. I want you to stick with your assignment. And so it was a discipline for me to stick with the assignment, to make sure that I look at it from the standpoint of a Christian counselor. And so let me get that part out of the way as far as what my approach will be. You see, when I counsel folks, I take them where they are and try to get them where they need to be. And I don't preach them sermons. You know, when they come to me, they're dealing with real-life situations. But every piece of advice I give them, every homework assignment, is based on biblical principles. You see, I've been forced to read hundreds of books to get my degrees in counseling, and sometimes the authors of those books don't know it, but every single principle that works in every book I've ever had to read is a Bible principle. Now, they may have spent a lifetime trying to discover that principle without reading the Bible, but it is a Bible principle. And so I don't apologize to folks. In fact, I advertise I'm a Christian counselor, so I'm assuming when someone comes to me, they understand my prejudice to start with. And I don't apologize for that along the way. Now, I don't preach them sermons, but I give them assignments. And sometimes those assignments involve them going home reading certain passages of Scripture, or taking certain things from those Scriptures that I have written and put in form, maybe marital counseling or something of that nature, and they go home and they have to read it. And when I give them those assignments, I say, if you don't do the homework, I don't see you. If they're not putting forth any effort, I'm not wasting my time and energy. And so in this context of the story of the prodigal son, we have some of those things. The context is already there. You see, when folks come to see me, the context is already there. And so I can't do much about the context other than just identify it and try to work with it and say, is that where you want to be? Is that where you want to stay? And if not, how do we get to where you want to be? You see, I'm not taking on that responsibility to be the one to decide, because I am where I want to be. I am doing those things I want to do in my relationship with the Lord. But I can't force those things on other folks. They have to decide that. So some of the approach that I will share with you today will be what you would have in a counseling setting. Now, I've divided it into 3 basic sessions. You know, the number of sessions I have with people depend on the people. Typically you would have 5 sessions with folks to make sure all those things are taken care of that they need taken care of, and then you decide from there if there's additional counseling sessions. In this particular context, there are 3 counseling sessions with each of the characters in this story, because it's kind of broken into 3 parts. You know, the young man preparing to leave home, he's away from home, and he returns home. And so those are kind of the 3 different aspects, and so I broke those down into those particular sessions. So if you come to see me, then obviously first thing we would do is have some intake information. I have to find out who you are and what are you doing here. And those are questions that have to be answered. And so I'll put before you what would typically be information from the story that you and I both can read about personal information about these individuals. And we'll start with the younger son just simply because we typically think this story is about him. And just by reason of clarification, that's typically what happens when I do family counseling. Someone is the problem in the family. And they come and present that person if this person behaved, the rest of us be happy. And what we usually describe in that
session or discover in those sessions is that was just a presenting problem. Now, that's really not the problem. And so we find out some other things. So this son is not really the only problem in this family. But we'll start with him because he's the one we're most familiar with. He is the younger of two sons. That'd be intake information that I would gain so I'd have a perspective of who he is. And in this story, he is, with first impression, he's discontent. He doesn't want to be where he is. He doesn't want to be home. And he's restless. He can't wait to leave. And he demonstrates some disrespect and irresponsibility. Kind of disrespect for his father because he preempts some things. He wants to make his own choices. And all of us would agree that that'd be intake information we'd get from this young man. And he preempted a very normal inheritance process. That's what happens sometimes when problems occur in families. We preempt things. If we were a little more patient, if we just waited till things worked out, we would typically have what we wanted, but in a context it was intended for us to have it. But he preempts that. He lacks appreciation for wealth. He just wants it. He doesn't realize how many years it took to accumulate it. He just wants it now. He's got things he wants to do with it. And he lacks a stewardship about those things. You see, it's there for his inheritance because somebody was a good steward of it. Someone managed it. He doesn't have that concept, and that's what we know about him. He doesn't have any knowledge or appreciation for investment. And so that's what we would know about the younger son. Then we have the father. He has two grown sons. Don't know much else about family context other than what echoes come from different members of the family, from the younger son and the elder son's description of the household. But he appears to have a considerable wealth. He's accumulated some things, property, livestock, those kind of things. He's responsible for a number of servants. Again, we hear that from echoes. We hear from the boys. He's devoted, provides for his family, and that's acknowledged from how the younger son describes him. And you see, if I'm doing family counseling, I'm talking to everybody, and I put all this together, get each other's impression of how they view the family. All this is part of the intake information. He's consistent in his character. Not any flaws as far as the younger son concerned. When he looks at him from a distance, he's very consistent in his behavior. He knows what he's going to find when he returns home. And he respects both sons in their choices. Now, you and I beat up on the elder son a lot. The father didn't. He loves his sons the same way. He approaches them the same way. His interest is the same for them. And we need to learn from that particular context. Then the intake information about the older brother. Notice I didn't, in my intake information, call him the prodigal son. I said the younger son. You see, it bothers me in counseling to label people. I don't take insurance in counseling for that reason presently. Because the insurance company require me to label you. If you come to see me, I've got to tell them why you came to see me. And now all of a sudden, if you're not careful, you're going to wear that label everywhere you go. That's who you're going to be. And there's means that I can label you, but we have labeled the prodigal son. The story calls him the younger son. And so we've labeled the older brother in a lot of ways, haven't we? He was the older brother in the story. Now, he has some behavior that gives him a name to us, but we have to be careful not to label them. We put them back into context. He's older of two sons. He's heir of double blessings. The context required that. He's the older son, and so he's going to be responsible for the household if something happens to his father. So with that responsibility also comes blessings to be able to carry out those responsibilities. And that's who he is. He appears to be angry and insecure and resentful. And that's when we label him, isn't it? Because he displays those kind of behavior. He shows disrespect to the father. Many sermons have been preached to clarify some of these behaviors in these particular individuals. He does not show appreciation for what he has. He hasn't lost anything. It's still his. It's all his. He doesn't appreciate it any more than the younger son appreciated it. He's experiencing it every day. He's a beneficiary of it every day. He hasn't lost it. He just doesn't appreciate it. He appears to be jealous of the younger brother. Again, there are a lot of things we don't know as to why those things would be the case. Some of what I will have in here would be questions that I would ask them. If I were the counselor, I'd try to find some of those answers. Why is that? We know what is. because it's described to us. But why is it? We don't know that. And so if I were to be the counselor, I'd try to find that out. So in the first session, what I would attempt to do in context of this rebellious son, this younger of the sons, I would ask him to describe the relationship that he has with his father and his older brother. I'd want to know that. How would you describe the relationship? Now, I could describe it because I've read the story. You could describe it because we kind of feel like they're our neighbors, don't we? And we kind of see them going and coming, and we've made some assessment about who they are, and so we could, but why is that? Why do we have that impression? What's going on with them? And so we want him to answer that question. Why have you requested your inheritance early? Now, we speculate. We've had sermons speculating, hadn't we? Say, maybe it was because... But why is that? I'd want him to answer why he wants it early. Why do you want to leave home? Now, you and I look at that home and say, wonderful home. He will eventually look at it that way, but I'd want to know up front, why do you want to leave home? Have you given your choice much thought? Our conclusion would be from a distance, he hasn't. And you know people I see, they haven't. They want their pain, their misery, their discontent changed today. And so they try to escape that by running from it sometime. And so I'd want him to be able to try to formulate, why is it you're making this choice? And now he's going to have to think about it. See, if I just lecture him or I preach to him and say, are you crazy? I mean, you live in this nice house and you have these servants. Have you lost your mind? Then he's heard those kind of things before. And that may be why he's leaving. But if he has to articulate it, now all of a sudden it's his. He's got to own it. And now he's got to say, I made a conscious choice to leave. He can't leave and say, I'm mad at him. I'll show him. He's got to say, I've chosen to leave. Then I would ask him, who's going with you? Now, we've made some assumptions, hadn't we? These are not good boys. Don't know if they're all boys. These are not good folks that he's going to waste his living with, because we've read the whole story. But I want him to know that he's made some choices, and are these really your friends? He would call them that. I counsel people all the time. They'll say, my parents don't like my friends. And I'll say, are they your friends? Well, sure, they're my friends. What makes them your friend? And see, now they've got to begin to say, why do I like them? Am I trying to impress them? I want to be like them. I just want to get away from my parents. I'm trying to trace the context. I would want them to have to answer that question. How long do you plan to be gone? Now, probably he hasn't given that much thought, has he? He just wants out of here. But how long do you want to be gone? And so I would ask him those particular questions. Are you now? Recognize you are specifically right now recognized as a grown person because you've asked for your inheritance. You're making a choice. Once it's given to you, it's yours. That's what adults do. And we know from a biblical standpoint, that's built in. A man would leave his mother and father, and he would cleave to his wife, and they'd be one flesh. He's grown now. He makes those choices. He's no longer under his father's care, and so you're there. I'd want him to know that. You've entered an adult world. You're not going to be able to blame your father for anything else. You can choose to leave home. It's your choice. Before you leave, look around. Really absorb who and what you would be leaving. You see, to say, you can't leave. Now, you're going to hurt your father. And you know what this family's reputation is going to be like if you leave. You say, I'm not going to put a guilt trip on him. I'm going to say, just look around. I want him paying attention to his father's actions. I want him seeing his older brother. I want him seeing those people who showed kindness to him, the familiarity of every day, having what he needs. I want him to absorb it because it's going to be needful for him when he leaves home. Pay attention to it. I didn't say you can't leave. I said, oh, yes, you can leave. But pay attention to what you're leaving. Write down this moment what you expect to find, do, and experience over there. Now, he doesn't really know where over there is yet, does he? He just knows it's not here. So what are you anticipating? You write it down. I want you to have something you can carry with you and see if it really measures up to what you think it's going to be. Remember, this is your choice. And all choices have consequences. Your choice. but they have consequences. To this heartbroken father, he's heartbroken when the son leaves. And so we've kind of identified him that way, and the assignments have been made. What you're experiencing, everybody experiences. Now, we do. Now, in different fashions, in different ways, but even if it's a natural process of children going off to college or moving away and they're getting married, all those things, these are some natural things that we experience. He doesn't know what the young son is going to do yet. He just knows he's not going to be home anymore. And he knows he's going to take everything that he's acquired for him and he's going to have it in his hands. He knows that. If we do our job and we let go the way we're supposed to let go, we're all going to experience this. Now, there's some folks who don't want to let go. But if we do what we're supposed to do, we're all going to experience what it's like for our children to say, okay, I want to leave now. And I want to live on my own now. Children have to choose whether they will live by the principles they've been taught or not. That's out of your control. Life is about choices. And for this, you will be able to see whether they are responsible people or not. Isn't that what you trained them to be? And so this is a natural process. And I hesitated when I was given the assignment. I thought, God's represented in the father of this story, and I'm not real comfortable giving God advice. And so I just kept it in the context of the story and said, in the family context, this is what I would say. And that God gave it to us as a story. And so I'm taking that liberty just in the context of the story. You taught your children through verbal instructions and pattern of life. And so you need to know that about yourself. That's what parents do. That's what you've done, and you've done a good job with that. I'd reassure them. I tell parents, hey, you've trained them. You've had them all these years. Now trust what you taught them. The only way you're going to know is for them to go out and practice those things. So be confident. You taught them correctly. Be confident. You gave them understandable, fair, and consistent rules. We know that from the story. That would be part of the intake information, and that would be conversation that I would have with that father. Rules create foundations for learning mutual respect, responsibility, independence. And rules hold families together, provide guidance and boundaries. You see, parents sometimes just need to be reassured. You were a parent. Children are going to say, oh, there's so many rules around here. Man, you just don't know what it's like. Yes, I do. Because God designed it to be that way. And this story, this father is following God's guidance, isn't he? You need to reassure parents, you've done the right thing. Why did you do that? Well, because God told him to. And so he just needs to hear that. And sometimes they'll take on the persona that their children have labeled them with, and they just get beaten down. So maybe if I'd done this, if I could go back and I'd spend more time, I'd do this. Well, you've done the best you can do. In this case, this father did all he could do to teach his children. You chose consequences that were reasonable, logical, and age appropriate. Now, there came a time when he's asking for his inheritance. He's given that. Up to now, he's not been able to do that. And now there is choice to be made. He's allowing this son to make a choice. He's also allowing the older son to stay home. Sometimes maybe we feel like we fit in that mode a little more these days. They like to stay home. But you were willing to allow your children to experience the consequences of their choices. That's a scary thing for us as parents. I'm here to tell you, parents, it's a mistake not to allow your children to make mistakes. If you let them make the small ones while the consequences are small, and understand that there are consequences to them, then they typically don't make the big ones. But if you and I go and protect them from all those small consequences, when they do get away from us, they don't know about consequences. And they make the big mistakes, and then it is horrific. And it's difficult. They don't know how to respond to it. Now, I'm not saying you teach your children how to sin, but they're going to break some rules sometimes. You need to have the consequences built in, let them think about it. Send them to the room and say, that was a really bad choice. Choices have consequences. I want you to go think about your choice. Now, I'd jerk mine up and paddle their backside and send them to the room, and all they remembered was I had a red face and I hurt them. And so they were in the room thinking about my behavior. There needs to be occasions where I send them in the room and say, there are going to be consequences of that behavior. They don't know what the consequence is yet, but they know there's going to be one. And they know it's because it's their actions and they've got to go think about it. That father made those kind of impressions upon his children. The story tells us that. And he was willing to allow them to suffer those consequences. Now, they're making real life choices as adults. My words to the older brother. Describe your relationship with your father and your younger brother. We don't know that, do we? Now, we build in some things and say, I want him to tell me what his relationship is. I want him to describe it. What do you think about your brother's request? He obviously knows it. Father's obviously told him to. This story requires that be the case. What do you think about it? Again, we've anticipated what that might be, but I don't want him to tell me. What do you think? Why do you think he wants to leave home? You suppose in a family that you'd have some assessments. Maybe it's a relationship with you. Maybe it's a relationship with his family. Maybe he's just always been this curious, adventurous person. Don't know. I'd want him to tell me. How do you feel about his decision? And why have you chosen to stay home? There's some indications maybe in our mind to say, he kind of almost sounds like he wished he'd left. We don't know that. The only way I'm going to know what's causing him to behave the way he behaves is to ask him, why have you chosen to stay home? Describe what home means to you. I don't think he's absorbed that. You remember I would have told the younger son, look around, absorb what home is. I would tell the older son the same thing, and that's what this question's about. What does home mean to you? Now he's got to think and say, it means, and describe it. So he's got to pay attention. He's got to look at it. You have been blessed with a father who cares about you. I don't mince any words when I'm counseling folks. If the husband is out of line, I'll let him know. You know that's not right according to Scriptures. If the wife's out of line, I'll let them know. You know that's not right according to Scriptures. And so in this particular case, he needs to know that he has a father that cares. He's got to pay attention to that. He seemed to be focused on the behavior of the younger brother, but he doesn't seem to be focused upon the father the way he needs to. He provides a safe and prosperous home. He's dividing inheritance between two sons. Where did it come from? They didn't provide it. The father did, and he needs to pay attention to that. You have access to everything your father owns. Why would you be jealous of anybody? You have access to everything. The younger son may have wasted what he was given, but you've never lost anything. And you need to pay attention to that. You will inherit your father's fortune. He would have, whether the younger son left home or not. He would have gotten double portion. But he's not lost anything. And he's had, in the process of having all the anticipation of everything his father owns, he's a beneficiary of it presently. And his father's responsible for it. You are resentful, jealous, and unforgiving. I look people in the eye and say, that's the rudest thing I've ever heard. But I'll wait until they're rude. I don't make that based on what the father said or what the younger son said. I base it on their behavior. And say, the things I've seen you do to your father, you are resentful and jealous of your younger brother. What do you think that does to your father? You're unable to enjoy blessings. He is, isn't he? Surrounded by blessing, he doesn't enjoy it. And I'd want him to know that. You do not show respect nor appreciation for your father. And then that third section, how are things going for you, is what I'd ask the younger son. You see, we'd kind of have to visualize. We visualize the younger son going off geographically in a distant place. I have to, if I'm going to be counseling with him, I have to assume that he just left home. And he's still coming to the counseling session, all right? Since that was my assignment. And I've got to talk to him. I've got to talk to him while he's in the far country. And so he's left home, and so I'd ask him, how are things going for you? I'm not going to make assumptions. Boy, it's bad, isn't it? I'm going to let him tell me. How's it going? You see, he had to think ahead of time, where do you plan to go? What do you anticipate when you get there? Write that down. I want to know if the things he's written down are turning out the way he thought they would. As much fun as you thought it'd be? Where are your friends? Remember I asked him, are these really your friends? If they were really his friends, they'd still be there, wouldn't they? We don't read that in the story, but I want him to feel that. What happened to your inheritance money? Now, we've read the story, and we know he wasted it in riotous living, but I'm not going to tell him. Somebody told me you wasted it. I'm going to let him tell me. What happened to it? I want him to absorb it. Okay, I had it. I no longer have it. And I make people, when they come into me, just give me a budget, say, this is what I spent it on. We're not going to change the future context unless we kind of know how we got here. And so they have to do that. If you could be anywhere you wanted to be, where would that be? Now, he knew the one place he didn't want to be earlier, wasn't it? And that's home. And now that you've moved away from home, and now that you've made your choices, now, where would you want to be? Of all the places you could choose. If you could choose, where would that be? We kind of think we understand what the answer would be, but I want him to answer it. What have you learned, and what do you plan to do about what you've learned? I'm not going to take on that responsibility and say, okay, you do these 5 things. All right, you go to your father, and here's what you say. Please let me come home. I'm not going to tell him any of that. I'm going to let him formulate in his own mind where he is, how he got there, and where he wants to be and how he gets there. Because he's going to have to be the one to make the journey. He's going to have to be the one to make the choices and the changes. And I'm not going to take on that responsibility. Do you have to be here? Well, he's already answered that. No, I'm going to say, you don't have to be here. So why are we still here? You can start your journey home today. I don't break confidence when I'm seeing different family members, but I let them know what I know about the context. And so I'd let him know your father's waiting for you, and he constantly looks for you. Because you're going to say, you know, he wouldn't let me come home. And say, no, you know better than that. You know who your father is. And I know who your father is. And know he'd want you to come home. It's important that you recognize where you are. We're not going to take our eyes off of where you are, but you know that you'd be welcome if you went home. It's more important for you to recognize where you want to be. People sometimes like to wallow in their miseries. Oh, I've made a mistake and it's just too late and I can't do anything about it. That's kind of the easy way out. If you made a mistake, then you've acknowledged something. I know that was wrong. If you know it's wrong, then you can correct it. And so you've got to make that choice. It's a sign of strength to admit that you've sinned. This young man says, I've sinned. That's a strength. And so that's where we're going to start. Remember, let yesterday be your teacher. Let today be a treasure, because tomorrow is tentative. You see, I'm urging him to go ahead and make those decisions. You know you want to go home. Let's decide to do that today. We've learned from yesterday. And today is that treasure. Tomorrow we don't know. And so I'm going to urge him to start making some decisions. Take what you've learned and make wise, healthy choices in the future. I'm not going to say, boy, you blew it. You don't have a dime left. I'm going to say, going forward, let's make really good choices. I told him before he left home, it's your choice, didn't I? Think about your choices. And now he's going to have to think about his choices, but in a positive way, say, I'm going to choose to go home. The broken-hearted father, don't take your youngest son's decision to have left home as failure on your part. His time away may be necessary for him to comprehend and appreciate what he's been taught. Now that's hard. That is really, really hard. But it's absolutely necessary. And that's kind of how God does us, isn't it? He lets us make the choices. It breaks his heart for us to make the wrong choices, but he created us creatures of choice. And it causes him to have great rejoicing when we listen to him and we make good choices. You're a perfect, inspiring example for your sons, and you can be a template for parents of every generation. You need to encourage parents that are doing the right thing, and so they don't get brokenhearted over their children's choices. Sometimes children's choices can rob us of the joy of our salvation. We can't afford for that to happen. Pray for your son's safety and look constantly in the direction of the far country, but do not go there. Sometimes we go looking for them where they are. And we spend all of our time and energy where they are. We've got to stay where we're supposed to be. And we look for them to come home. He needs to find you where he left you. Do not give up hope or change who you are or what you do. Through your heart, though your heart's broken, you continue to wield a powerful influence. You see, if I'm talking to those sons and they're telling me things that are going on, I know their father's wielded influence. And so I'm going to not break confidence, but I'm going to say, you have willed a powerful influence. Don't change who you are. Sometimes parents panic and they say, okay, they say they don't like this, and so I'm going to change. If you're doing the right thing, never, ever change. They want to know consistency, and they want to be able to come home to something that doesn't change. How's it been since your brother left home is what I'd ask the older brother. How's it been? Oh, it's been great. I don't know that. He might be miserable because they hung out together. Even though they fought a lot, he may say, I really miss him being here. I want him in the confidence of my presence to be able to say, this is how I feel. Do you think about your brother? Have you talked to your father about your brother since he's been gone? Now I find out whether they're communicating or not. They're both hurting, aren't they? But are they talking about their hurt? Are they communicating about those things? How would you feel if your brother returned? Now, see, I know some things that are going on. If I'm in counseling, I know some decisions that people are sorting with, and the brother wants to come home, and I want to know how the older brother is going to respond if he comes home. Describe how you feel about home. Notice how consistent I am with asking that question to those boys. What's home to you? If we're talking about coming home, and obviously the story is saying there's rejoicing in heaven over those who come home, we can't miss that lesson. We can't lose it. And that's what these stories are all about. The final session to the younger son. What made you decide to return home? Describe your father's response. How did the servants respond? I want him to absorb it. He was supposed to absorb it before he left. Now I want him to see what it's like when he returns home. How does it feel to be home? And what advice would you give young men and women who are thinking about leaving home? How did your older brother respond to your return? Why do you think that is? You see, he's going to be home now, and they're going to be in the house together, and they're going to be functioning together. What's that like, and what are we going to do about it? Look into the mirror and see who you are. Determine the person you want to be. Make a list of your blessings and acknowledge and express gratitude for them. He didn't do that before, and if he's going to begin anew, he needs to do that now. Emulate your father in his attitude and his treatment of others. He had a very clear, distinct view of his father. Now you emulate that. Spend time listening to and talking with your father. He wanted to get away with him from him before, for whatever reason, and now he needed to absorb it. To the father, I would say, describe how you felt when your son returned home. You see, we talked about what that might be like and encouraged him to pray for him and look from a distance. How did you know it was your son when you saw him from a distance? And we speculated about that, hadn't we? Maybe he walked a certain way. What difference did you notice in your younger son when he returned home? Think there were any differences? Oh, there have been differences. What were they? And now what appreciation do you have for him? How did the servants respond to his return? How did his older brother respond? I want the father to pay attention to that. How was that? Now he sees some of those things, and we can assume some of those things. Your consistent, fair rules brought about your son's restoration. He did acknowledge that. You stuck with it. You were consistent. You did the right thing. That was attractive to him. That's the one thing he said, in my father's house. I want the father to know that he did it right. He beat himself up when the son left. He needed to be rewarded when the son responded. Your son knew the way home. Why? Because you taught him. When he knew what he would find when he got home, he knew. Didn't have any question in his mind. Here's what I'm going to do. I know what home is going to be like. Why is that? Well, he absorbed what home was like before he left. Your attitude of forgiveness is inspiring, isn't it? It's inspiring to say, well, I told you so. Boy, you're going to have to work your way back up. That didn't happen. He forgives him. The celebration illustrates rejoicing over a sinner who returns to the Heavenly Father. I'm a Christian counselor, and I don't miss those opportunities to say, we're talking about spiritual matters here. It's not just about us, it's about heaven. Your compassion and forgiving spirit demonstrate the love of your Heavenly Father. You demonstrated wisdom by reassuring your older son of his place in your life and in the family. He did that. We don't give him credit for that. But he went out to him because he cared about him like he did his younger son. And I acknowledge that. You demonstrated that wisdom. Everyone depends on and is comforted by consistent character. The younger brother, I would say, how did you find out your brother was home? Now, we know the story, don't we? But I'd want him to tell me how he found out. He might say, my father didn't tell me. I need to know how he feels. How do you feel about him being home? Describe what you think your father's relationship is to your brother. What would you like your relationship to be with your father and your brother? Are you happy with who you are and where you are? You see, that kind of gets to the point, doesn't it? Arrange to talk to your brother and resolve the differences. Now, we keep preaching the sermon because it is what it is. But if I'm a counselor and I'm working with this family, I'm going to say, how do you want it to be? Describe to me that, and now, how do we resolve it? We're going to have to talk to each other and describe your feelings clearly. Listen to him with an open mind. Be respectful. Learn to rejoice with those that rejoice and weep with those that weep. He can't do neither, can he? And then obviously there's a group session that has to take place. If this is family counseling and we have a family here, what lessons have each of you learned? I'd let them sit there together and I'd let them articulate in front of each other what they've learned. Is the family all that you want it to be presently? What needs to change? What can you do to help bring about that change? You see, I make it personal now. Well, the brother needs to stay put. Well, the younger brother needs to be more respectful. Well, Daddy needs to not show favorites. We say, okay, what can you do to contribute to the family being what you want it to be? All of us have a part in it. Define what you think the family's goals ought to be and how you plan to reach them. Now, if they hear each other talk, they all buy into it and they know each have a part. Life is brief at best. They're not going to leave my presence without hearing it. They need to realize that the clock is ticking. Count your blessings. And you be fully aware that you ought to tell your family and your friends how much you appreciate them. Something tells us the younger son didn't have any trouble with that, at least the first few weeks home, did he? Focus on the things you can control and let go of the things you can't control. That has to be our philosophy of life, and I wouldn't close a session without telling them. Remember, let yesterday be your teacher, today a treasure, because tomorrow is tentative. It's not assured. I would say to you as parents, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. I would say to children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that you may live long on the earth. I would say to all of us, as we contemplate who we are and what we ought to be doing, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. When I was a young boy, when the TV used to go off at night, just before it would go off, about 10 o'clock, on the newscast, a question would be asked. It's 10 o'clock. Parents, do you know where your children are? I'm talking about on the TV. It's important that children know where their parents are. You need to stay where God intended for you to be. But it's equally important for us to recognize that parents have a right to know where we are. And they're concerned about where we are. And mutually in this story, we know these boys know where their father is. And the Father's concerned where they are. Our Heavenly Father is concerned where we are. He asked that first couple, where are you? Not because he didn't know, but because they didn't know. And they had to answer the question. That's what I would say if I were present and I were counseling this family. I appreciate your attentive nature.